Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Jason Myles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you are new to the channel, thank you so much for joining us on this very lovely Saturday. Well, it's lovely here. Can't speak for where you're from or living. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. If you're a returning patron, fuck yeah. Well, all right. So glad to have all of you here with us. As many of the patrons know, a few months ago, we launched the Crisis Papers, a bi-weekly series. I shouldn't lie and say bi-weekly. A series of essays. And issue number 5 is out. Second time around, musings on how we got another Trump term. Now, these are free to all patrons, and depending on your tier, the magazine formatted version is free as well. But if you are not a patron and would like to support this show and this type of writing, you can purchase them wherever you are watching or listening to the show. There are links in the description to the Crisis Papers. Also, if you enjoy what we do here on TIR, stuff like these call-in shows, the best way to make sure we can continue is to become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can be a part of the TIR crew, hang out with us in the patrons-only champagne room, and depending on your level, you can get exclusive patron-only merch. If you want to try it out, it's free. That's right, it's free. For 7 days, you can try it out. Wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there are links in the description to becoming a patron. Also, everyone's favorite Anglo-pessimist, Daniel Besner, and my good friend Conan Neutron are going to join me tomorrow for a special, for me it'll be early morning, it'll be about 8 a.m. stream where we're going to discuss grunge. It'll be a hoot, I promise. Now, on to Ask Kuba Anything. As you can see, the number is on the screen, 510-319-1899, area code 510-319-1899. He's everyone's favorite Imperial PMC, the middle manager of all middle managers on the Death Star. That's no moon, that's a ship, and it's filled with middle managers, and he's the head of the management team of managers. My God, seriously, there's so much going on in the world. Will the Trump administration negotiate a peace deal in Gaza? Insane wildfires ripping through Southern California. I actually didn't think anyone in my immediate sphere was affected by the wildfires until 1:50 this morning. I got a message from my cousin, who we're relatively close. I just haven't spoken to her in a while. And she lost everything. Everything. Oh, so heartbreaking. Justin Trudeau is out in Canada. And what does that mean for the immediate future? The phone lines will be open. But before that, let me bring in my homie, my dog, a man I'm glad to call a friend because it does help when the stormtroopers are coming. Please welcome Deep State Kuba. Hey.
Hello, everyone.
How are you?
It's a nice balmy day here on Tatooine. The moisture farmers are happy, right? Like minimal traffic on the way to Mos Eisley. Happy to report. And we're working day and night diligently on Ewoks that torture themselves, which would really boost productivity in my unit.
They torture themselves, huh?
Yeah, they go, we're trying to introduce them to emo music, certain teenage practices of North America, ritualized bullying. We've managed to really crush the joie de vie of the species by about 50%, but I think there's room to improve on that.
I have to switch some things around so I can make sure the phone lines are on. Can you be entertaining for less than 5 minutes?
For less than 5 minutes, I mean, a Kuba story barely starts 5 minutes in. But if anybody wants to kick off in the chat with an initial question, that might be a great way to fill the air while the phone lines get reactivated.
This is pretty funny. The jumpsuit with the tie is like the Slavic professor on break.
Informal attire.
So give me 1 minute.
Formal attire is a black jumpsuit.
I hope you don't have one.
No. I'm too young to be going to funerals.
This is one.
No. Everyone in my family actually is savagely bad at music. We were celebrating somebody's birthday with my wife, and we started singing "Happy Birthday." And Summer, my partner, she does have a good musical ear. She's trained on the pipa, the Chinese string instrument, and she could identify that not only were we all off tune, but everyone was out of tune in a different way, which takes an extraordinary level of musical incompetence. So no, I'll leave the music to Jason. And he can leave the Slavic pessimism to me. The quick tour of the alcohols of Poland. Well, funny that you should say that, because of the partition of Poland by the three powers during the 18th and 19th century. You had a vodka-heavy zone in the east where the Russians were in charge, and then a more beer-heavy zone in the west where either the Prussians or the Austrians, linked that territory with their markets. The word vodka, wódka in Polish, means little water, quite literally, and Poland and Russia constantly bicker about who invented it. Unlike yogurt, which everyone knows was produced for the first time in a cave in Georgia. Not Atlanta, Georgia, Tbilisi, Georgia. There's also miód pitny, mead, that in its traditional variety really needs to be spiced and prepared properly to be palatable. It's this weird sugary consistency without being sweet. Why did Jakub create white folks? Presumably to fill middle management positions. You need HR representatives. You need people who will manage healthcare programs and deny care. You need people who complain to managers as well as managers. So that niche ecologically got filled by the Jacobian parasites of Nation of Islam lore. The Caucasian food is fire. The Georgian food has a tremendous reputation. Georgian restaurants. There's one in Vancouver, but there were several in Washington, D.C.
There's a Georgian restaurant in Vancouver?
Yes.
Is it new?
I think it's been around for a few years. There's been an influx of sort of post-Soviet migration.
Gotcha.
Relatively recently, and I think that some Georgians also came over in the most recent wave with the Ukrainians during the Ukrainian war.
I don't know if you know this because
during the outbreak.
with a stream with him, but Alex Herbert, who my personal friend as well. I believe a lot of the research he did when he wrote his first book on the Soviet Union. He wrote a book. He's got the only book on the history of punk music in the Soviet Union in the Library of Congress. Georgia is where he went back to make a short documentary on the migration of people from Russia to Georgia since the war, and kind of the music scene and what that started there. We played it on the show last year. It was actually really, really good. But he goes to Georgia when he goes that way.
The Georgia, I haven't had the chance to go, but it's supposedly one of those destinations where not only is there incredible food to eat and sites to visit, but people are just excited that foreigners are coming. It's kind of the opposite of Spain.
We need to do like an on location TIR thing. I don't know if you saw on Wednesday, I was supposed to do some interviews for an article I'm supposed to be writing, which I don't even know how to get into it without these important interviews in LA. And I was there for the wildfires, so everything was shut down. So the one place that was open was the Rainbow on Sunset. So I went there and did the show from there, which was a bit of a hoot.
I can imagine.
Oh,
were they happy to host you, or was it one of those things where, sir, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Sir, we have a strict no podcast policy.
No podcast. I thought it was going to get a little bit of I had been there. I was going to get some work done. I was basically treating that place like a Starbucks or something. So I was like getting some work done. I was the only one there for hours. I was the only one there. So I had met the staff and everybody was really cool. So after a while, they were like, "Oh, just do your show here." And no, it was actually really, really cool.
You hear that? The Rainbow in LA.
It would have been more fun even if it was just me and you there. I think it would have been nuts if it was me and you there. Because they did give me Slash's booth to do the show in, and I was afraid I'd be too loud. But I think had you been there, you would have convinced me to do it there instead of outside on the patio, and then it would have been more insane. I believe that.
We'll have to test it out next time I'm in LA.
This is what they said about me. Are people afraid to call?
I'm happy to take to pick up some of the questions from the chat. We
got a few good questions in the chat. Let me see. I thought I saw an actual. What is your favorite 90s cartoon?
I was
not allowed to have joy.
No, as long as I did well in school, then I basically, as long as the A's kept coming, then there was a great deal of latitude given in terms of pop culture taste or extracurricular activities. I recall the Pirates of Darkwater being a particularly impressive one.
Are you being serious?
Yes.
You know, Larson just literally just did a show on that.
That's not where I got it.
That's so odd that you said that, because I was like, who remembers that one? Because it didn't last that long.
No, it didn't. And it was kind of traumatic for me because I saw 1 or 2 episodes and then they kept moving around the time slot and you were at the mercy of the 3 channels you could get into your British Columbia. So I'd be waiting for it and it's like, wait, what is this bullshit? This is like the news hour now. The Gummy Bears. That was Gummy Bears. They're here and there.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Although the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were probably like the biggest obsession. Like I had T-shirts and stuff, and I did. It was one of my prized possessions was this neon yellow Michelangelo T-shirt that I wore to absolute death. And then when I got a little bit older, the gritty, ultra-violent, early pre-show, pre-boulderization for the kids, comic books became a kind of like gateway into indie culture. So yeah, I might have to go with that.
I don't want to get too into your childhood, but I feel like finding a comic book store where you grew up must have been a bit of a challenge.
The size of the city at that point, like, we were just large enough to basically have one of everything, but only one. So there was one comic book store, Ted's Paperbacks and Comics. And Ted was okay. But the better on the selling than the buying end, let me put it that way. He lowballed me for my baseball cards. But
in my head, you just have all these like ridiculously like, is Babe Ruth rookie good? Yes. Oh, this is crap, kid. This is crap here. I'll give you $5.
I think the problem was that I was bringing the Eastern Bloc knockoffs. Like, who is this Daryl Strawbersky? Then Matigliov.
It was like when Japan. Have you ever seen that? Japan had made a baseball game for Nintendo, but the baseball players' names they had.
Oh yes, yes. It was amazing. It was basically a combination of utterly fabulous name, stuff they just totally made up, and things that were real names but one or two letters off, like Bravis McDickle or something.
Every time I see someone post a picture of that, I have to share it because it is one of the funniest things ever, and you can't get mad, right? Because
oh no,
it's not the language they speak. So like,
it's also rather charming the way they get it wrong. And I'm a giant aficionado of Japanese culture. It was the only Asian language that I could learn in high school, right? Your choices for a foreign language, and French is not foreign in Canada, but were Spanish, German, or Japanese. And I was pushing back against my father's deeply held Eurocentrism, so I took Japanese. My sister, the good girl, she took Spanish. And so, like in the 90s, I guess I was an early generation weeb, but the one thing that I noticed was you'd have movies or shows or books where you have a profound insight into human psychology, wrestling with deep existential questions, and then a foreign character is introduced. And it's like, wow, you don't understand foreigners. Like, I've read unflattering depictions of Westerners and white people, some on this show. So it's not that. It's not like highlighting the negative, but just like putting a weird emphasis on things and making foreigners behave like Japanese, just weird, right? And the naming conventions on that baseball game were priceless, right? I think that maybe somebody had told them that if you use real names, they might sue you.
I think it had something to do with that because they got the names from, I think, an all-star game. Because if you look at it, you can kind of see the names they were trying to get. Bobson Dugnut was still the best name. Young Walken, who, for those that don't know on Twitter, is Sean from the Antifada. And he has a question for you. He goes, in your expert opinion, how close are we to mutual? And as I'm reading this, I'm hearing Sean say this with that New York accent. In your expert opinion, how close are we to mutually assured destruction with Russia the last few years?
Frankly, I think that just like during the Cold War, when at key crisis points, you've had Soviet personnel take the high ground and push back against, in some cases, orders to attack during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a Russian nuclear submarine that was subjected to a depth charge attack by U.S. ships. And according to their standing orders, that meant World War III was on fire on American targets. The ship commander refused to carry out those orders and instead surfaced. There were other incidents like that with false positives on Russian Soviet early warning systems that were supposed to trigger a retaliatory strike, but against their own standing orders, Soviet officers waited for confirmation, and it turned out to be nothing. Similarly, ultimately, the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved by Khrushchev stepping back from the brink, not by any concessions made by Kennedy. Partly, this was, I'm not going to talk about the individual motivations in every single case, but I think that both in the Soviet Union and in Russia now, there's a view that in the long run, Russia will survive or the Soviet Union will triumph. So there's an aversion to burning down the house that eventually you expect to be the master of. And while America and NATO have taken moves that are clearly very provocative, most recently the ATACMS strikes into Russian territory, right? Western weapon systems which require NATO support and NATO personnel to operate, launched into Russian territory, killing Russian citizens. That's an escalation, and that's also a direct assault with NATO forces. That there's been threats of substantial retaliation, and even Putin has suggested or implied in coded language that nuclear weapons might be off the table. But I think that actual exchange of strategic weapons, the Russians are sort of too sensible. They understand that this is not only a kind of ring-fenced conflict, but one that they're winning through conventional means, and that they can win through conventional means. Therefore, escalating to nuclear weapons would be counterproductive. Ultimately, if they used them against American targets or NATO targets, they'd risk absolute devastation, right? The only way to escalate from there is mutually assured destruction. If they use it against Ukrainian targets, well, then they're going to have to clean it up after the war, but once they bring it to a successful conclusion. And why create that headache for yourself when you don't need to?
Well, there you go. Your question's answered. We actually have a call now, so let's see what this is about. Now, if you do call in, we are using a whole new streaming software here at TIR, and if you see me look like my tuchus is a little puckered up, it's because I'm extremely nervous with this new this new software. We had been with the same place for about 5 years. But one of the problems that we had was that people couldn't hear Kuba when we called in. So please ask your question, and you'll have to take your answer off air, as you probably won't be able to hear Kuba. So let's bring this caller in. Calling from an 843 area code caller. What is your name and where are you calling from?
Can you hear me, Brother Jason Myles?
This is Pog Chaser MLK.
I'm no longer going by that name. It's the new year, so it's a new me. I've given up on the ways of the Pog, and I've turned back to the holy light of the Nation of Islam.
What?
You may call me Pog Chaser Martin X Luther King. I'm trying to diversify the vagina that I get on the side by encompassing more races than Pogs. Now, the question I have is for the white devil of Yakuba's own creation, State Kuba. Why is Poland so hated in the European Union?
Why is Poland so hated in the European Union, Kuba?
Well, there were different phases of anti-Polonism, Polonophobia. I don't know. Both of them sound weird. But initially, there was an anxiety throughout the 90s that Poland represented a economic and social threat, in the sense that, like Mexico to the United States, that they weren't sending their best. They were going to take our jobs. They were undercutting wages, and they had a natural criminal disposition. To be fair, in the 90s, we got really, really, really good at stealing cars. Like the talent that the subsequent generation brought to video games and femboy cosplay, that my generation dedicated to figuring out how to bypass security features on a BMW. There were you could actually get into German marketing based entirely on this kind of anti-Polish racism. There were these ads for travel packages to Poland, like, come visit Poland. You know, they'd publish in a German newspaper, your car is already there. And yeah, so there was that. The Polish plumber became a bugbear, that they were coming for your jobs in Britain, which was one of the early EU countries, now former EU countries, to accept large-scale Polish migration. You had 1 million Polish people moving in, and it did fundamentally change the labor market. Later, Poland, as it negotiated political entry into the EU and became a participant in EU structures, was the only Eastern country large enough to push back against the Franco-German leadership and drift of EU institutions. There was a great deal of anxiety about what this might mean for the EU. One thing that I'd like to do around 2003, 2005 was, whenever I met Europeans, I'd ask them if they thought that Polish entry was a good idea. And if they said yes, because they knew I was Polish, I'd say, great. As soon as they let me in, I'm going to come to your hometown and steal your job. But I had a frank conversation with a friend's German father, and he said that his anxiety was that the EU could barely function as is, because you had the Northern Europeans, largely the Germans, that were dedicated to making the institutions work and following the rules, while you have countries like Italy that are constantly undermining the economic stability and the political order. And he feared that Poland would represent a decisive tilt in the Italian direction. My response to that was that there's a big difference between the East and the South. The South, meaning Italy primarily, but to a certain extent, as we saw with the EU crisis, also Greece. Southerners have systems that are shot through with corruption and patronage and don't necessarily follow the bureaucratic rules of the EU. But that's combined with, in the 90s, a profound cultural pride and willingness to assert, that their countries and their societies are great already, and they don't need to be rationalized or reformed along a Franco-German Enlightenment model. Easterners have the same problems with corruption and a lack of sort of rules-based culture, at least in the post-Soviet and late Soviet period. But they are embarrassed by this. They see it as a sign of backwardness, and they look up to the German and Western models. And I think that has been borne out. Poland has become significantly less corrupt compared to the 90s. It's become much more of a team player. It absorbed the acquis communautaire and the body of EU laws effectively. But on certain issues, for instance, a very pro-American tilt during the Iraq War, or a refusal to open up the question of reparations for displaced Germans, those people who were dispossessed and forced to migrate to Germany proper after World War II. Poland was effective in steering policy away from the preferred outcomes of especially Germany. And as a result, a certain antagonism developed between East and West, between Poland and the Western heartland of the EU. This was exacerbated by the kind of Kulturkampf that was launched under the Law and Justice Administration when they pursued a national identity, a sort of early version of national conservatism, an Orban style, we hate the gays, anti-feminist, pro-clerical, pro-Christian cultural agenda. And with Tusk back in power, that's shifted back towards a much more EU positive stance, more in line with, depending on whether you like it or you don't, multicultural enlightenment or globo homo. But this is the main reason why Poland gets that type of negative attention in the EU is because it's large enough to matter. Hungary, as annoying as Orban is, as long as he's stuck around, and as much as he's done to entrench one-party rule in Hungary, just doesn't have the economic or political heft because it's a much smaller country, much smaller population, less closely connected with German supply chains and European, overall European economic integration. So the damage he can do is minimal compared to what Poland could do to steer Europe in a anti-European direction.
Well, Dr. King X.
So what you're saying is that they hate us because they ain't us. That whole long diatribe could have been summed up as they suck at washing because it seems the medieval kingdom of Poland was the only one that was washing their ass, and so they were scared of the plague. And who could say that their hatred does not stem from the jealousy of having winged hussars at the top of your army?
It's true.
Having great instruments such as the tragista. And I would say that you cannot compare the kingdom of red and white to Hungary, which has the GDP of a small sailing car dealership.
Well,
And lastly, the Poles seem to be the blacks of Europe. Is that not correct?
Is that true?
If you're looking at EU countries, I'd say that the Romanians have supplanted us there. And if you're looking at the continent as a whole, don't sleep on Albania.
They're the blacks of Eastern Europe.
The Romanians are not the blacks of Eastern Europe. They are the Puerto Ricans of Eastern Europe.
The amount of racism that is coming out of this. Dr. King X, thank you very much for your call, and I hope you appreciated Kuba's short answer.
Yeah. Oh, I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
One more question.
Mm-hmm.
This is, as myself, this is McFizzle. So I live in the Midwest. Can the anti-Polish sentiment and relatively inexplicable European ethnic racism of the Midwest be basically summed up in the same way that it is in Europe? I'll take my answer off the air.
Hey, thanks, Fizzle.
So, I got an answer to this in graduate school because the anti-Polish racism in the U.S. has different roots. It stems from the answer I got in graduate school was that when Poles dropped out of democratic machine politics in Chicago and stopped voting with the Democrats, that's when you had the real effervescence of Polish jokes coming out in the US, which Polish jokes in Europe don't have the same character, right? Like, sure, there's the German perspective, like the Italians are constantly stealing our women and the Poles are constantly stealing our cars. Or jokes about, I once heard Gordon Brown described as having all the warmth and charm of a haunted cave in Poland, right? Poland is a byword for historical trauma, gloom, dourness, but not necessarily Poles are dumb. That's an American thing. And I don't know if it stems from the character of Polish migration in the early 20th century, late 19th century, which was more rural, more proletarian than maybe the Eastern European Jews or Italians. Or maybe it comes out of that moment in democratic machine politics. There's also an antipathy towards Poland that some Jewish Americans feel because their particular old country origin stories frequently feature Slavic anti-Semitism as what drove their families to migrate to the United States. And with the Holocaust, there's a conflation of, good old-fashioned, old-timey Polish, Eastern European anti-Semitism with its pogroms, its quotas. I won't sugarcoat it. It could get ugly. It could get lethal with the Third Reich and the Holocaust, which were not offshoots of that Eastern European racism. That was a German affair and very, very different. Indeed, many Eastern European ethnicities were targeted for annihilation in the same way that the Jewish population of Europe was. But the two elements combined to create this image of Poland as a thuggish, narrow-minded, intolerant, bigoted, racist, anti-Semitic country. And that's not entirely wrong. But one feature that I stress about Polish political culture is that while it has that fascist ethno-nationalist element there, that's balanced with a liberal and even left-ish element that's about as strong, which is why Polish elections are competitive. You very frequently have a kind of 40-40 split between liberal Eurocentric parties and anti-EU nationalist parties, as well as a split between Poles who are xenophilic, who celebrate the fact that there was a multiplicity of cultures and communities in Poland before the war, and those who, we really hate Hitler, but maybe he did us favor with, the Jews. I lost your audio.
That was my fault. I was on the inside. So the phone lines are open. Area code 510-319-1899. 510-319-1899. You do not have to call in as one of the famous show characters. You can call in as yourself. It is totally fine. But we do have some interesting questions coming through on the chat. This is from Ken. Thank you for the super chat, Ken. Kuba, is it true that when we take Greenland, you will become the provisional governor?
No, that is not true. I will become assistant to the provisional governor.
This is from Dusty. Thank you for the super chat. This is in a foreign currency that I don't know. Can you tell what currency this is?
Oh, that looks, if I had to guess, it's either rupees or some kind of crypto.
It's drachmas. 20 drachmas. What's your take on why the U.S. has refused to move al-Shara from the terror list and talks coming from the Israeli cabinet plans to partition Syria?
So I think that with the war in Gaza, there's been a polarization of views on Israel. And while you see public opinion getting more and more sympathetic with towards Palestinian suffering and the victims of Israeli aggression more generally, you, within the administration and within elite circles, a doubling down of support for Israel, Israel forever. That's reflected inside the security apparatus, inside the foreign affairs apparatus, as ambivalence between two American strategies around security in the Middle East. One being a kind of Turkish, Saudi, Sunni alliance against Iran, where you have a very strong urge to rehabilitate al-Shara and to try to accommodate and support the new government in Syria, since it represents a break from the axis of resistance, so-called. However, there's also a maximalist pro-Israeli element, faction, perspective, where at this point you just support whatever direction, whatever policy is coming out of the Netanyahu government. And in Israel, there is the same ambivalence, but with a much stronger emphasis on unilaterally solving the security question and imposing a new Israeli-centered reality on the neighborhood. So I think that it'll be up to Trump to settle that. And given his statements, I wouldn't be, I think that there might be a Trump Tower or two coming to Turkey in order to smooth the progress of the new Syrian administration. That may be what it takes.
Here's the question that is probably this is gonna be the biggest question of the show right here. Can you read this out loud, please?
Do I feel at all guilty for cheating on TIR and Jason with Ben Burgess?
That's what. Yeah.
Hey, man. You know, like, I'm a socialist of love as well as all other things, right? Property isn't the only thing that I think we should be sharing and caring. So you're not gonna convince me that I've done anything wrong. And right now, you know, like, you guys are the only ones who get the tracksuit.
There's that.
Mm-hmm. GTA.
If we were smart, if Ben and I were smart, I think more people don't know we live 2 doors down from each other.
Mm-hmm.
If we were smart, then we would use like you and Gene as wrestling pawns, and you would just come on there and talk shit. Just be maybe like mildly racist, but not all the way there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that would be, we would both just, our shows would blow up so big if we created a fake drama like that.
Yeah, mildly racist, but against you for being American and against Ben for being Croatian.
Like just stupid shit. And me and Ben would still like live stream together in Tijuana, and no one would, you know, pay. Hey, what's
this
going on?
This is Deep State Kuba with a message for all the GTAA nation.
That would be, that's one of those things I would love to do if I actually had like a budget.
Mm.
And I could be
Can you smell what Deep State is cooking?
Like, get you a whole set in Canada, and you're just going off, just screaming into a microphone about how much you hate this and that, and you're leaving, and you like your tracksuit's zipped up, and then you unzip it, and then it's the GTAA shirt, and you're like, I'm switching teams.
Exactly. That's right. We've got all of the Canadians over at GTAA. Yeah, actually, we did a show a few days ago about the Pierre Poilievre and his interview with Jordan Peterson.
Well, I haven't talked to you about, well, we did in our private chat a little bit talk about that, and you made your prediction that you hoped that the failure of the liberals.
Yeah, I personally, the liberals are, with the soft bigotry of low expectations of ruling parties in the West, right? The liberals are fine, right? They aren't privatizing the healthcare system. They do all of the typical terrible stuff that you expect, but refreshingly, they don't come up with new, unexpected, terrible stuff to do. Whereas the conservatives, especially on environment, the ways in which they come up to service the oil and gas industry is just breathtaking. The damage done to Canadian ecosystems, and as well as the global climate through conservative administrations is quite alarming. I mean, Trudeau pushed through a pipeline in my own backyard in British Columbia, so I don't love him for that, but conservatives do all that and more. And I'm not going to dance on Trudeau's grave. He filled out the role. He served his time. He did the expected amount of damage. I wish that things had been different, but you know, this is the world we live in. Well, I think that Pierre Poilievre is going to introduce, he's going to invent whole new depths of hell. And the Peterson interview, I do not recommend it because it's an incredible simp job from Peterson. Right? It's like, do you ever get tired being so awesome? Is it difficult, fighting against woke socialists every day for the working class? And so it's misleading. It's breathtakingly boring. It's Peterson at his most washed out, exhausted, low energy. You're getting minimum Jorpy. And Pierre Poilievre is.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I do want to ask you this question about Peterson. Do you think, because I did a show the other day about why the left shouldn't be too concerned with people like Jordan Peterson, with Arturo De Simone, because he wrote a thing in Sublation about it. Do you think Peterson is tired of pretending he's this far right?
I think that I don't think so. I think that he's just tired. He's not young anymore. I think that his ascent to celebrity intellectual status has taken a lot out of him and taken a lot from him. And at this point, there's nothing new to his shtick. And it's exhausting being angry all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that I have no idea what his educational content is like. I'm not going to pay for his low-end Jungian philosophizing about the Bible and how great Western civilization is. But he seems like he's going through the motions at this point. And his daughter doesn't seem great. I can't imagine his family situation is wonderful. So I think that he might be circling the drain he's stuck around as a sort of legacy figure in the same way that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, late phase, represented to Democrats.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting comparison. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not against what you're saying. I'm just saying that we have a call calling from a 517 area code. Caller, what is your name and where are you calling from?
Yeah. Long time listener, first time caller. I had a question for the Polish guy. Who do you like in the Stanley Cup this year?
The least Canadian thing about me is my utter indifference to professional hockey. So I'm going to, when I was a kid and I was first introduced to professional North American sports, for some reason, I took to the Detroit Red Wings. Yeah. I don't even know if they still exist.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go with that because it's got red in the name.
Caller, I would assume that you are a Red Wings fan.
Yes, very much so. This is more of a comment than a question, but when you were saying that thing earlier about Gordon Brown being like Cape Poland and Poland being taken as this like kind of symbol for gloominess, I mean, all I can think is, man, that's strange. I've known Kuba for years. Where would people get that idea?
What did he say that you're Gordon Brown?
Poland is being a symbol for dourness, and
let's repeat that because
Yeah, you said that people see Poland as a symbol for gloominess. And based on my years of acquaintance with you, I just don't know where people got that idea.
Oh yes, the my famous joie de vivre, right? Always looking on the bright side of life, optimism, together with that British, uniquely British ability to always keep a stiff upper lip and an optimistic face. Yeah, like I think that I'll move on to other questions, because in terms of where the reputation for gloom and dourness might come from, that one kind of answers itself.
Caller, are you still close by? Because if so, I was going to ask, or if you wanted to go hang out later after this show.
Briefly, I think I'm going to drive back up to the States this afternoon. So if you want to grab some food after the show, I'm there.
Okay, I will hit you up when the show's over. See if you want to get some. You want to get some ribs before you go.
Maybe. Yeah, we'll talk about it. But anyway, get the. So I'm gonna let Dr. Kuba go back to debunking stereotypes about Polish dollars toxin.
Thank you very much. Caller.
Once we get the Xanax and the water supply, that problem should take care of itself.
That is Ben Burgess from Give Them an Argument. My sworn enemy.
I'm telling all people in the GTA nation, putting you on notice.
There is a super chat here. Another one from Ken. Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much. Kuba, what can Americans expect from our soon-to-be 51st state in terms of DEI initiatives? I guess that means Canada.
Yeah, frankly, I mean, you asked that facetiously, but I think that Canada's existing social diversity infrastructure, meaning official bilingualism, accommodation of Quebec distinct society, is a poison pill for Project 51st State, because there's no way that the United States is going to be officially bilingual, right? Imagine if Donald Trump had to answer every question in English and French. Yeah, that's just not going to happen. But without that, you can't get Canada.
Really?
You could get Canada minus Quebec, potentially, but then it's not really Canada. The negotiations would get too complicated and boring. I think that all of this Canada, the 51st state stuff, may be maximalist position. So when Trump seizes the Panama Canal, or strong arms Denmark into giving up Greenland, it looks moderate by comparison.
Do you think any of that is actually going to happen? Like, there's a lot of big things that he says, but he said big things 4 years ago or 8 years ago. What I will say this, I had some troubles at the border. I don't know if I told you this. I went on the Champagne Room, and I'm not going to tell the whole story again, but I was denied entry when I was coming back. And I think that's kind of a response to a lot of the horrible things that Trump has been saying from the campaign trail to his victory. But I haven't really seen too much things change at the border.
Mexico, U.S. or
yeah, Mexico, U.S. Like, do you really think that's going to be his focus, or is it going to be something insane like the Panama Canal or Greenland? Because again, he does do some insane shit.
So from World War II onwards, the vision for American security strategy has been this transatlantic alliance, with NATO being the institutionalization of collective decision making, American led. And that's been respected by every president, from Truman to Barack Obama. Trump was the first president to actively undermine it. And there's a reason why that was such a radical step. In general, that transatlantic alliance system has worked extremely well as a means of projecting US power and as a means of ensuring compliance from other advanced economies. It has ensured the United States trouble-free access to things like Canadian natural resources, as well as European markets, European finance. It has allowed for trouble-free basing of American assets across 2 continents. NORAD, for instance, would be impossible without Canadian participation, and NATO is the vehicle for that. The bargain, the American side of the equation, has been that what they provide, in addition to support from external threats, is that the United States respects, at least de jure, the sovereignty and independence of the other members. Every once in a while, they get to win some symbolic fight, and you don't subject them to the same kind of naked imperial aggression that a country like Iraq or Syria, Lebanon, Grenada, right, Cuba might be subject to. Now, removing that assurance of American good behavior is a radical step. And in some ways, the genie's already out of the bottle, right? Like, if NATO, which was supposed to secure the independence and sovereignty of countries, of the smaller members, instead is a vehicle for bullying, threatening, and in this case, outright imperial expansion from the United States, then what good is NATO for anybody but the Americans? At that point, all of the grandstanding that the United States has something more to offer than China or Russia, that, you know, as bad as it might get under the war on terror, the United States was always saying, like, but, you know, imagine the Russians, imagine the Chinese. Well, the Chinese have never threatened to annex Canada or invade it. The Russians have never claimed Greenland. So I think that there's already a substantial loss of confidence in NATO and transatlantic institutions. And that might accelerate a trend towards American unilateralism, even against what were once reliable members of the transatlantic alliance. I think that it'll take a year or two for Trump. You know, I wrote a Jacobin article about this with Ben Burgess, my, the third in our socialist polycule, that it'll take him a while to purge the deep state, to wring out the people who obstructed him in his first term, and his supporters. Until that's done, he can't really do anything too crazy. I also think that J.D. Vance doesn't have the same appetite for confrontation or the same interest in undermining all of these elements of the established order, that he's going to want to succeed Trump in a world that isn't a dumpster fire. He's not going to want to deal with Canadian insurrection, right, in the eastern occupied territory of New Brunswick. But the Panama Canal, I mean, that's not a heavy lift. It's not the first time. It wouldn't be the first time that the United States invaded Panama, after all, right? Mm-hmm. The independence of Panama is a product of American imperialism, and the Panama Canal territory doesn't have the same status as Greenland or Canada proper. So that would be the canary in the coal mine. I think that it would be a major step in undermining permanently, in terminating the rules-based international order that nominally every previous president has not only signed on to, but been the biggest guarantor of. But we'll see if he can get the juice to do that. That'll be stage one. And that isn't entirely plausible. If he can get the sort out the bureaucratic opposition that is still going to be at work trying to prevent him from these kinds of shenanigans.
We have a ton more questions. There's so many questions that have come in for you. Here's one. I want to ask Kuba, which of the two Red Scare girls is hotter? I know he fancies one of them, Anna or Dasha. Kuba,
the question is which is which.
He doesn't fancy either of them because he is a married man and he only has tunnel vision.
I'm gonna say both at the same time, and only that.
Are they too average for you?
No. There's nothing wrong with them. They're very attractive. They're very attractive women. But the problem with Eastern Bloc types for me is every once in a while they do something that reminds me of Mom.
I don't know those people. I know one of them was interviewed by Josh Citarella, and I watched a little clip of that, like a very little clip of that. But I've never. One of them's on like an HBO show. I've never seen that, so I'm not familiar with him. I have the same aversion that you have, but not because of my mother. It's just like, oof. Probably nothing there for me. Someone said, sorry, Mom. People are scared to call. Why are people scared to call you, Kuba?
Because they're under 40 and chat exists, right?
Oh, is that what it is?
I don't know anybody who uses phones as phones that is younger than we are. And I have to admit that, like, when my phone goes off and it's actually ringing, it's like, God.
Like anxiety? Or
well, is it going to be a scam or is it going to be my parents?
I actually just saw a thing on some of these phone scams, and they are heartbreaking on one end. Mm-hmm. On the other end, I'm always thinking to myself, how the fuck did you just have $300,000 lying around that someone extracted from you in a matter of weeks?
I mean, that's why you go for the olds, right? Or if they made it this far, right? They still have a phone.
Would you say that? I don't know if you've been following some of these phone scams, but it's just been real irritating to me to get so many text messages like, "Hey, Frank, you ready to go to the dick suck contest today?" What? Right? They're getting crazier and crazier. I'm starting to get AI pictures of Asian women.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm at the gym. I'm like, is that why you have 8 fingers on one hand? And I don't respond to any of it because I don't want to respond, right? But when you see these stories of people, your first instinct is they're all elderly. They're not, but there is a loneliness factor in there where, oh, someone's going to dinner. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, somebody thought of me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a combination of the atomization and loneliness that people feel, especially after post-COVID, that disrupted so many of the. There's a book called The Strength of Weak Bonds. I can't remember if it's a book or an article, but it comes out of sociology, and it talks about the importance of the acquaintances, second or third order friends, people outside our most intimate circle for mental health, for social well-being, for the cohesion of institutions, things like that. And I think that COVID, for a lot of people, fatally undermined that level of relationship. If you had them before, you lost them. And if you didn't have them before, you don't even know how to make them now. You don't even know how to cultivate that thing with the person at the cafe where you just like recognize each other and occasionally chat about the weather. The situation where you talk to a neighbor, but you don't even know their name. But whenever you see them, right, it brightens your day a little. And without that, there is a yearning that people look to fill. I think a lot of our relationships have moved to online formats, so you're more comfortable. It's more natural to talk to somebody via text or interact with them in these electronic media that are the most liable for scams and hacking. And partly it's because of the technology. It's taken off to the point where you can automate the small talk and bullshit, right? Like the first part of your con. And it's much easier for scammers if they can have all of their prospect hunting being done on scale by technology, and then they only need to intervene once they got a live one on the line.
Have you seen the new thing they do? If you try to bust them out, they send you messages. They're like, "I'm being held captive, and they rape me every day."
Yeah, I mean, I barely reply to people I know.
There's a lot of truth in that.
And so if I get anything that looks like a scam where you're not already in my contacts, and I'm pretty sure that we haven't met at the country club, like you're claiming, then yeah, I just leave those alone or block them. What they do with me, what I get a lot of, is the fake USPS or Amazon delivery.
Yes, that's another scam. Apparently, they're really big in dating apps now.
Yeah, I believe that.
Which is really, really scary because you're assuming. I think there's an assumption that people have with dating apps that everything you're interacting with is legit. And the first people I heard talking about these crypto bros, which probably weren't really existing, they were bots, was women. And when I was still back in my day, when I was on dating apps, women would always be like, and don't talk about crypto, because they would match with a guy because he had all the right pictures. And then it was a series of texts about investing in crypto.
Yeah, and I think that all of this is only going to get worse, because what it would take to address any of these pathologies would be some kind of concerted state regulation and law enforcement. This is criminal behavior, right? Let's be clear about that, right? It's not that this is some kind of annoying prank phone calls. No, this is crime. All of these people are committing crimes. They should be arrested. They should be investigated. They should be prosecuted. And that's just not happening, right? The laws are already on the books. You don't need to do anything more in terms of legislation. It's not one of those unfortunate gray areas where what they're doing is legal. It's like, no, this is fraud. This is straight up fraud. But nothing gets done. No one ever gets busted. No one ever goes to prison. No one is even identified. Right? The police don't look into it. Right? The police will look into a noise complaint, but they won't look into somebody losing, somebody being harassed by a fraudulent actor. And Trump is going to, he's already signaled on crypto that there's going to be a much looser regime than in the past, much friendlier to the crypto scammers. There's not going to be any control over this type of activity beyond Trump potentially fundraising from them. And I don't know how bad it gets before it could very well be that this is a situation where tech bros in 10 years white knight some subscription only solution where you have to pay $50 a month so that your identity doesn't get stolen. That may be where we end up, right? The racket for the big fish becomes more lucrative than what the little fish can put up.
Well, we have some people that want to talk to you about all kinds of things, from fishes to Ponzi schemes. Calling from a 559 area code. Caller, what is your name and where are you calling from?
Yes, this is Eric. I'm calling from Minneapolis right now, but just wanted to ask Kuba some fun things, just to kind of, lighten the mood a little bit. I mean, I actually agree with just about all the stuff you guys are talking about. But, first and foremost, if you could tell us, what you're contractually allowed to share about Deep State Kitty, would like to know the, history behind that. And if, who would win in a fight, Sphere or Cube? And as always, please support your answer with science. And then, do you think Jason is ever going to mend fences with Emma Joy Lane? He stopped talking to me about it. Maybe you can shed some insight on that.
Thank you very much, Eric, for the call, and stay warm in cold-ass Minneapolis.
About the Jason Emma Joy Lane, about the Jason Emma Joy Lane situation, confrontation. There, I'm contractually obliged to withhold any comment. I can say that negotiations are ongoing. They're at a very sensitive phase. Anything is possible. There's grounds for optimism, but also, in any case, things could go very, very wrong. I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. Sphere versus Cube. That one's easy. What is the Death Star? So there you go. Although technically, I guess one could construct an X-Wing out of cubes, and it turns out that X-Wing beats Death Star. So I'm going to say that that's a rock, paper, scissors situation, with the edge going to Pyramid. And as for the deep state situation, my first encounter with the American security apparatus, apart from immigration control when I was coming into study in the U.S., was in graduate school. My dissertation was going nowhere. I basically needed a job. The upside of my alma mater was that I have friends who have dads who were looking for assistance. And the most interesting opportunity was in Dubai to work on a Department of Defense project for the United States Air Force, looking at tribal engagement with the mostly Sunni, but some Shia tribal leaders of Iraq, from Al Anbar all the way to Kurdistan. And it was fascinating. The reason that I got it, which there were many people in that world who were less than pleased that non-American was in this role, was because my boss, my friend's father, was extremely paranoid about hiring from within organizations and hiring people that he didn't have a personal connection with. He had been a higher up at American Airlines, very, very close to the CEO job. It was one of 3 contenders for the CEO job. And his theory as to why he never got it was because the assistant that he had hired internally was actually a mole for one of the other guys. So he only wanted people who didn't have any conflicting bureaucratic alliances, didn't have any conflicting internal interests, and who had a personal connection to him. And the guy I was replacing, for instance, was his other daughter's ex-boyfriend. The person who replaced me was another college friend of his daughter's. And it was a weird gig. It was a combination of being a personal assistant / gopher. Like one day I was sending coffee cake to different bases across Iraq, to various generals that we were trying to butter up. I spent so much time making airplane reservations and handling travel arrangements. And God, he was such a diva about that. It was like Ellen DeGeneres level. But then I was also briefing flag officers and generals from different branches about the internal politics of Iraq, meeting with the sheikhs themselves to discuss the security situation within Iraq, to discuss logistics, Al-Qaeda attacks, and then the next day I'd be buying armored cars. It was a very, very interesting gig, paid off my student loans, lasted just under 2 years before I was fired. Then a few years later, I was coming back from my time in Vietnam. I had just finished my dissertation. I had been lured back to Washington by someone who is very high up at Brookings right now, who assured me that Berkeley PhD and my field experience would make me a shoo-in for a think tank gig. That was not the case. And my old boss was so pleased that I had kept my mouth shut after he fired me that he rehired me. And that time it was much more of an HR manager on the Death Star type role. I was in Washington in an office, filling out proposals, handling an insane amount of mind-numbingly boring bureaucratic paperwork, but also going to the Pentagon, working on different studies, geopolitical studies. I gave presentations on China and Russia, strategic empathy is what they were calling it, as well as internal organizational projects related to the Air Force again. I liked some of it. It was cool taking a scooter to the Pentagon and then like going up to hang out with a bunch of generals. That part of it was nice. They sent me to a bunch of Air Force bases across the United States. I was at Edwards Air Force Base in California when they were doing the photo shoot for Captain Marvel, the first one. Shit. So I also saw how the Air Force interacts with, and the Department of Defense more broadly interacts with different parts of American society and American economy. And I lasted about 5 years before I got fired. So that's the big picture of my experience in the deep state. What I can say is that it is an obsessively bureaucratic system. Everyone's preoccupied with securing the next promotion, the next rung on the ladder, the next contract, the next paycheck. And the relationship between what the government does and who does it is this absolutely bizarre pantomime of capitalism, where what the military, and we're talking about the Department of Defense, not even something like Health and Human Services, where you might expect there to be a minimum of direct provision. But virtually everything that the DoD did, apart from pulling the trigger, and even then, with the rise of private military contractors, a lot of that got outsourced. But virtually everything the DoD did, they didn't actually do. They paid somebody else to do. And the amount of time spent identifying vendors and wrangling as to whether we go with company A or company B to install phone lines at some military base, or handle the digitization of medical records for the Customs and Border Patrol, for instance, is mind-numbingly boring and long, right? If you sank all of the resources that go into that bureaucratic rigmarole and actually hiring people to do the work, it's difficult for me not to believe that there'd be more efficiency there than in the system as it's construed. But what happens with the system as it is construed is that public money that's supposed to pay for all of these things gets put back into private hands. The contractors and the agencies that do the work or provide the staffing for what are putedly public agencies.
There's a super chat on the screen from Comrade Sheldon. Go ahead.
The theory that elements within the 1% are trying to nudge us into a 2 class. I don't think that we need to be nudged into a 2 class system. I think that we already have a strongly class-based society with, and even the proponents of capitalism that I encountered at Harvard and at Berkeley, they wouldn't argue that class doesn't exist. They would argue that class is inevitable. And what makes our system, the American way, the best is that the lines are porous, that it's like a hotel with rooms on every floor, and guests move up and down based on merit and ability and willingness to work hard. Now, that second part is crucial for the ethical justification for class-based society, and that's become harder and harder to support as from the early 90s onwards, right? The amount that the burden placed on poor Americans is so great that it's hard to imagine class mobility. And not only that, we have Thomas Piketty doing the work, and it's well established empirically that class mobility under capitalism and liberal society is much less than its proponents imagine. A UBI wouldn't be innovation in terms of separating classes. That already happens. It would be a palliative measure in order to try to dampen the resentment and aggression and mobilization of the losing end in the class struggle. It actually is one of the, depending on how it was implemented, it could be a very progressive measure. Mm-hmm. But the proponents like Andrew Yang of a UBI from the right tend to look at it as a way of anesthetizing the pores so they don't cause any more damage. And I think that we may have what's coming may make us want that sweet, sweet palliative UBI money, because there are much, much worse ways of organizing a class-based society.
That's kind of frightening. We do have some more phone calls. Calling from a 312 area code. Caller, what is your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, this is David, and I'm calling from Maryland.
Hey, what's up, David?
Oh, yes. So my question is, there's like a lot of rightful criticism of Iran and the axis of resistance, which is especially clear given the situation, the economic hardships in Iran, as well as the almost complete dismantlement of the axis of resistance. And if we look at Gulf states, which are really closely aligned with the Western world order, it seems that they're prospering much more, obviously, than the axis of resistance. And so, given these two scenarios, do you think that there is any underlying unsustainability of this Western-led Gulf state order in the Middle East, or given the prosperity of the Gulf states, do you think that there's often like a ignoring of any underlying dark underlayers or unsustainability with this project? I'm just asking this because it seems like there's a lot of kind of jubilance, especially in the West, of this axis of resistance failing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the phone call, David.
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question. And let me recapitulate it so that it's clear to everybody, and that to make sure that I'm getting the gist right. So the question is about the international order in the Middle East, the relative weakness of the axis of resistance, loss of Syria, turmoil in Iran, economic hardship in Iran, versus the strength, especially of the Western-aligned Gulf states, which are in a lot of ways more prosperous than ever, seem very stable, glitzy, and seem to be riding high at this moment, while also being closely connected with the Western U.S. led efforts at creating a friendly order and containing, rolling back Iran, for instance. Now, it's clear that the axis of resistance is having a terrible time. Hezbollah has been decapitated, and more importantly than the loss of Hassan Nasrallah, I think the pager and walkie-talkie attack wiped out an entire layer of cadres.
Damn.
It's very difficult for an organization to effectively operate and effectively fight a conflict when it has had so much of its PMC class sidelined. I think that the war in Lebanon isn't going as well as the Israelis would want. It hasn't become another Gaza, but Lebanon has definitely tilted away from the axis of resistance. Hezbollah has definitely been weakened. The maximalist goals of securing everything south of the Litani River for Israeli hegemony, maybe that's a bridge too far, but definitely as an actor, Hezbollah has been significantly weakened. Similarly, with the loss of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, the land bridge connecting Iran to the borders of Israel, that's been severed. The loss of Syria is a very significant blow to the axis of resistance. And the dominoes haven't necessarily all fallen. We'll see what happens to the Syrian Kurds in Rojava. I think that their resistance against ISIS has been heroic, and I think that they're a relatively admirable actor in a region which, generally speaking, has few feel-good stories. But the United States, under Trump before, has already betrayed them once to the Turks. Turkey has signaled that it sees them as an existential enemy and seeks to wipe them out entirely. And they are the main bulwark. They're the jailers, keeping all of the ISIS cadres that were demobilized and incarcerated out of the fight. So if you hit the Kurds in Rojava too hard, maybe you get an ISIS revival. And the threat there, I think, is greater on the Iraqi side than on the Syrian side. But it's very, very ISIS. I wouldn't count them out entirely. Now, especially since they might be a vector for Saudi and Gulf influence to undermine rising Turkish hegemony in the northern tier of the Middle East. The relationship between Turkey and the Gulf states is not entirely harmonious. What used to be a kind of two-way pushing contest for regional control between Saudi and Iran has turned into a much messier and uglier confrontation with different poles and different players. Turkey, much more aggressive, territorially expansionist Israel, Saudi, and Iran. The Saudis might prefer the Turks to the Iranians, but they don't see the Turks as necessarily being friends or allies in the same way as they might treat the UAE. After all, even within the Gulf, there was a substantial break between Qatar and the other members of the GCC. There was the MBS-led attempted blockade of Qatar. And don't forget, one element of the axis of resistance that remains active and unconquered is Yemen, which has successfully managed to block shipping in the Suez Canal and confront the U.S. and Western forces militarily in the Red Sea, as well as stop GCC forces from their land offensives against Houthi positions. So I think that until Yemen is completely subdued, we can't really say that the GCC is secure. There's also, while MBS, with his incarceration and shakedown of other members of the Saudi royal family, the notorious Hilton prison affair, while he has consolidated control within Saudi Arabia, and has done enough so that, generally speaking, there's a relative comfort within broader Saudi society for his rule. These things can shift suddenly, and they're also heavily personalized. Something could happen to MBS. Israel isn't the only country with assassins, and Israel might. Well, in any case, there's many actors that might not want MBS around any longer than he has been. There's also a substantial Shia population in Saudi, a Shia majority in Bahrain, that have been the target of very harsh repression by the Sunni governments there. Like there was an uprising in Bahrain that was crushed militarily with significant loss of life. Saudi intervention in that case as well. Perhaps that's a front that Iran could reopen if they sought to try to undermine the relationship, the Gulfi influence, the GCC influence in the region. And a lot depends on whether or not the West can somehow separate Iran from the Russo-Chinese alliance. As long as Russia and China remain active supporters of Iran, Iran has a source for the basic material goods it needs, and it has a destination for its oil. And at a certain point, if too much pressure is placed on Iran, then the Iranian government may have nothing to lose by doing something more radical, such as shutting down the Gulf of Hormuz, the Straits of Hormuz, and preventing Gulf oil from reaching international markets. The main reason that it doesn't do that is likely because it doesn't want to anger China, which is a major buyer of Arab oil and gas. But at a certain point, right, the geopolitical realities will outweigh those considerations. That's also a risk if you try to separate Iran from its allies. So I think that the axis of resistance, so-called, and I don't see Iran as heroic in any way. They're just one power among others. But they're definitely back-footed. The GCC is strong, but their failure to quell the Houthi conflict, that points to some real weakness in translating their economic and diplomatic power into actual regional hegemony. And I think that that's limited what they've been able to do. I don't know how much further they can go, right? The GCC can only really project power by buying other people's coercion. You can support fighters in Syria, but the fighting isn't done by GCC forces. It's done by Syrian Sunnis and the kind of international jihadi brigades. You can support Yemeni or Somali or Libyan warlords, but you can't actually do much with your own forces in those conflicts. So I think that even with Trump back in power and a closer GCC-US alliance, there are real limitations into translating that economic and military heft into actual changes on the ground. like Bashar al-Assad himself was a minority dictator in a war-torn and tottering country. I don't know how much more low-hanging fruit there is for them to pick.
Sorry, I was we got disconnected. The phone line got disconnected, so I apologize. But I'm here. I hope that was a thorough enough answer. Comrade Calvin did have a follow-up. Did you see this? Thanks for the UBI answer. I agree. I was, however, more curious about the idea that a social credit system will regulate who gets what. Maybe a better question would be, is Whitney Webb blowing smoke?
I don't know what the Whitney Webb comment is, but one reaction to the social credit discourse that I hear a lot from my Chinese friends is that, Dad, I learned it from you. The social credit is based on credit scores, specifically US credit scores, which also dictate whether or not you can get a home loan, whether or not you can get a credit card, and that dictates whether or not you can buy things, whether or not you can
get a job.
Get a job. Landlords will check your credit, right? Yeah. So it becomes a prerequisite for housing. So, social credit's already here, my friend. In some ways, it's more intrusive than what's happening in China. And the fact that it's privatized means that it's not amenable to regulation or reform, right? It becomes much, much more difficult to undo the social credit system because you can't just change it by policy fiat. It's entrenched within private institutions that aren't subject to direct control by a democratic or reformist government. So I don't think that we need to imagine a social credit regime because we're already living under one.
Why do people not want to see that? Is it just the idea? Is it more just Red Scare politics? The big bad China is going to do some magical thing. There's a TV show called Black Mirror that I believe you've seen.
Oh yeah,
about Black Mirror. And in the 3rd season, which I think Netflix produces, there's a great episode. I forget the name of the episode, but Ron Howard's daughter is the star, and I think she directed it as well. Where every interaction she makes, there is a score that she gives someone and someone gives her, and the whole thing is she's trying to live in this nice area, but the only way she can move in this area is if she gets a better class of friends, and yes, they have a higher score. And the better class of friends, she finds out, is inviting her to a wedding because they're going to get better credit score by being nice to poor people. Now, these things actually already exist in the real world, and you didn't need a science fiction story to tell you that these things already exist in the real world. If you are altruistic, you are looked at as a better person. There's a reason why Bill Gates, regardless of what people in this chat say about Bill Gates, the world thinks pretty highly of the guy. He still has quite a bit of social cachet with his charitable organizations. So this idea that being nice to someone poor is going to help you propel yourself even further in the ranks, in higher ranks, makes a lot of sense. Also, not just anybody is going to be able to move into a nice apartment. You have to have a decent credit score, because guess what they can do? They can pick. They can pick who they want. It is not first come, first serve. It's who in our building.
Exactly. And who's our kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that everyone reading 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, that there's a reason that perhaps that these are the books that are assigned on high school syllabi rather than Sinclair Lewis and critiques of capitalism, that Black Mirror episode. The specter of Soviet level, East German level surveillance state and overt coercive control has been such a staple of Western dystopia that anything that can be characterized that way gets picked up and propagated, while by privatizing the exact same type of exclusionary mechanism, it becomes invisible to many Americans, right? It is not that government is doing something that you're being oppressed. It's that, well, these are the rules of the game and you're just failing. And if you think about it, it's insane. They did a similar thing during Jim Crow, and it remains the case up to the present day, where you can't have slavery, but you can arrest people for a crime, incarcerate them, and then force them to work. Mm-hmm. Now, the only difference between the two is that in the second system, it's somehow the prisoner's fault. And granted, if you're a serial killer cannibal, sure, make license plates or whatever. Yeah. But don't forget, until recently, one of the biggest sources of new inmates was drug laws, and especially the downstream thing, the types of drugs that are now considered to be harmless, if not therapeutic.
Mushrooms, marijuana.
Precisely.
Ecstasy in some cases, yeah.
Exactly. So if you you could use those types of convictions to convert somebody from regular person into a forced laborer. And like I said, it's ongoing. There are incarcerated firefighters that are in LA right now fighting the blazes, right? And granted, they have a choice. These are people who opt in, but their alternative were other forms of forced labor.
Yeah.
And that is a major blind spot in the United States, especially. It's not oppression if it's done through the market.
I did find out, because I did want to read a little bit about that, because I think there's an oversimplification of the incarcerated firefighters. Because my first thing was fire departments. I don't think people understand how they blow up when things like this fire in LA happen. And were you in the Bay? You weren't in the Bay Area for the, no, you weren't, because it was 91. When the Oakland Hills fire happened in the Bay Area, that's when they put there's a fire department on every corner, and Montclair, if you're familiar with those areas. And those started to close after a while because they didn't really need them. So you're seeing some fire departments close now, and a lot of times it's because something happened in an area and the first reaction was, okay, we need 12 more fire departments. That being said, there is a pathway actually to a job when you get out. And then that's complicated as well, right? Depending on what you did when you went in, yada, yada, yada. And I didn't know that. And there's about 900, to give you an idea, firefighters right now that are incarcerated trying to fight this fire in Los Angeles. Of the 7,500 or so firefighters that are out there trying to fight this blaze. And they do work the part, they're in the front lines of this fire.
Of course, they're the most expendable.
So it is. And I'm sure you saw in California that, you bring up a very good point, that drug laws created this term that was very popular 8 years ago, which has seemed to fall out of favor, which is mass incarceration. And we're going to see it return. I don't know if you read the article. I don't know if I sent it to our group chat. San Francisco has seen a massive decline in even car break-ins, 20-year low. And London Breed still lost the mayoral election to a tougher on crime billionaire. And one of the things that the Breed administration was doing, to kind of give you an example of California as what I think the rest of the country is going to look like, is start locking people up again, but for retail theft. There was a new law that was voted on, and people voted on it and said, we want this. It was the Homeless Prevention and the Homelessness and Retail Theft Prevention Act, which enabled law enforcement to add up your retail thefts to equal the amount that's enough to get you incarcerated. So that we're going to see more people incarcerated for retail theft. And if you think about what led people to want to have a 94 crime bill, right? Drugs are out of hand, which means violence is out of hand. So we have to lock up these violent gang members, drug dealers. We want drug dealers to go to prison for long periods of time, blah, blah, blah. So we're not talking about violent streets. We're literally talking about, you keep robbing the CVS and I have to see you do it. And I'm a good person and I don't want to do it. Ergo, we need to lock all you, CVS razor stealers up, because I'm tired of waiting to get my, hygiene products out of the locked case at the Walmart. And I don't think people are thinking through, well, we went down this road already with literally violent criminals. And now we're talking about people that are really on the more non-violent side. And we want to institute the laws that we thought were too bad 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Again? Where is the uproar? Where is the George Floyd-like protest? Where is the BLM? Did they just get their money, Kuba, and they're done?
I think that one problem with any attempt at fundamental reform, especially in the United States, is you have activists who are at the front pushing for it and get rewarded for the most radical kind of demands and dialogue, the most inflamed rhetoric, which, when liberal emotions are high, gets picked up and reproduced among the suburban set. That's how you got wine moms pushing white fragility and Nancy Pelosi in kente cloth taking a knee for white supremacy, right? But that emotional response from the middle class suburbanites that kind of direct the course of democratic policymaking, it's a fickle thing. And the outrage for George Floyd killing can easily be countered with rising anxiety from street crime, homelessness. People don't have to be the victims of violent crime to believe that it's a major problem. They just have to feel like they might be, like it could happen to them. Everyone always has a story of a friend of a friend of a friend who was accosted by a homeless person. And we shouldn't minimize this because it happens, right? It happens and it can be life destroying, right? In a large enough society, you have people who are victims of terrible crimes all the time. And that's a problem that should be addressed. If you want to do something substantial, you need some kind of organized institution or movement with people who have the resources to continue pushing for reform even after the emotional valence around an issue like crime has shifted, and who understand institutions well enough so that when they defund the police, they have not just talking points and social media strategy, but a org chart for what's going to fill the gap, whether it's community support services or I think in many cases, in many places, American police forces are compromised enough so that you should just shut the whole thing down and stand up another one. But standing up a police force, standing up any agency, especially one that has weapons and guns and these kinds of things, is a heavy bureaucratic lift. You need to think about staffing. You need to think about organization. You need to think about internal policies, all of these kinds of things. It's hard, and it can't be done overnight. You should be preparing during down periods of the cycle your Project 2025 style roadmap about how to get there, what institutional levers your leaders could use to enact those policies, and the left just doesn't do that, right? Part of it is because organizations like BLM or movements like BLM or Occupy Wall Street before that are suspicious of the types of hierarchy and organization that you need to effectively run this kind of strategy, to effectively develop this kind of plan, program. Part of it is because there's a dearth of leftist billionaires to pay for all the labor that's required to do that. With the gutting of unions, you can't pool collective working class resources as a replacement. And many left organizations either rely on fundraising from people who are on the exact opposite side of the issue, at the exact opposite end of the class hierarchy, or are very vulnerable to these, media-dominated, flash-in-the-pan fundraising opportunities, which attract as many grifters, Sean King style, as they do. I would argue they're much more likely to attract people who treat it entrepreneurially than people who have a longer term effective vision. So what we end up with are cycles of less or more law and order repression based on economic factors that are beyond the debate, things like housing prices and inflation and other cost of living, labor market issues, or have this roller coaster of suburban guilt leading to backlash, leading to fear and anxiety, and cycles of incarceration as a result.
Do you think there was a time where I thought, okay, a lot of businesses like to use cops as kind of a security force, but with a lot of the protests, with a lot of the defund talk, police do this thing where they just won't respond to something. Or they'll say, if they do so, well, we're understaffed. And sometimes they are actually. Not every police department is the same, right? Don't quote New York City's numbers and think that's the same for, insert regular town here, Santa Barbara. I don't know. But I do think they enjoy private security forces a hell of a lot more because you can shift the responsibility. you can control them better than law enforcement, and they're pretty cheap.
Well, I'm told that one of the community services that the Nation of Islam would provide is security at events or for local businesses in areas where people mistrusted the police and didn't want to rely on the police to come in and sort out any disputes.
Are you talking about Emeryville back in the 80s and 90s?
Yes.
Okay, this is good. Everybody's pull up a chair for this one, because this is a hoot.
Oh, you should tell the story. You know it better than I do.
No. Go. It's were you there? Were you at Berkeley?
No, this was right before I came. I arrived at Berkeley in 2004.
The Nation of Islam had a very large, this is going to get me in so much trouble. They had a very large presence in the East Bay. And there's a city in between Berkeley and Oakland, and it's really small. I think Emeryville is about 1 square mile, if that.
Yeah, and there was, I remember one of the, it's heavily black, and gentrification, and there was a very strong Nation of Islam presence. I remember too, there were Nation of Islam offshoots, like the Black Muslim Bakery.
Yes, it was massive. And they were running shakedown operations on local businesses, black owned. And a reporter decided to do a story on it because he was kind of taken aback by the organized crime. I do believe there's a lot of racism in up from poverty narratives for different ethnicities. There is a glorification of the Italian story, and even to some degree the Irish story. The black story, for some reason, is always mired in, like, at best, 90s crack bullshit. If you're lucky, some sort of 70s heroin bullshit. But organized crime is organized crime. It looks the same everywhere you go, right? You got the muscle to do it. You're going to shake people down for some money. And the Nation was doing that. That faction of it wasn't everyone. And I don't want all the Muslims. I can't have all you bow tie wearing niggas for trying to fuck me up. And they killed the reporter that wrote the story, which didn't make it better for them. But that presence is, I haven't been to that area of Emeryville. It's very, 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 very different now because of gentrification, because of investors coming in and kind of getting
condos in Banana Republic.
You want to kill organized crime? There you go. There's your formula. Condos in Banana Republic.
Yeah, and people need a security solution that isn't organized crime.
Yes.
And BLM, the critics of arbitrary police violence in the United States, were very good at pointing out the problems with existing police institutions, but they didn't have an answer as to what was going to replace them.
So do you think private security? I think private security is the future and the answer to a lot of people's concerns. And I don't say that in a good way. I think this is the dystopian future I'm predicting.
I would argue that when you break up police jurisdictions into small enough units, townships, right, like Santa Barbara police, for instance, then in some cases the police act like private security, right? They're responsible and accountable only to the residents of that area, which are not necessarily going to be the people who are there on a day-to-day basis, if you're part of a bigger metropolitan area. So in some cases, you'll see police institutions acting more and more like private security. I think that we already have a lot of private security across the United States, as well as these kind of, Harvard and Berkeley both had their own. Harvard certainly did. I can't remember what the situation was with Berkeley. It had its own police department.
I believe they had cops there.
Yeah. And even if you don't have your own straight up police department, you have your private security. I think that it is going to be the real moment that we should be looking for. The real pivot is when private equity and large financial institutions begin to acquire and merge private security.
Ooh.
When Blackstone is not only your landlord, but also the cop on your street, then that's when it gets integrated as a fundamental feature of the system and becomes another node in that governing financial power.
That's frightening.
Yeah. And they've already done it with hospitals, ambulance services. The move after the 2008 financial crisis, and this is enough time has passed so that people may not be aware of this. Private equity didn't used to be a massive landlord in the United States. That is a new development, and it's not staying. It's not limited to that sector. In medical devices, medical services of all kind are also being colonized by private equity. And I think it's only a matter of time that downstream services, the whole debate about charter schools and educational reform, the discussion is about quality of education, but underlying all of that is whether or not all of that public money, all of that parents' money, can be secured, can be eaten up, fed into the private equity big finance machine. And until something is done structurally about malefactors of great wealth, as FDR put them, then the drift is going to be towards finding more and more frontiers for them to colonize and monopolize.
There's already private fire departments. That's a real thing. And there's some championing of private fire departments, as I think one business stood in the Palisades because it had its own fire department, they called. And on the right wing and libertarian front, I saw people. For some reason, I get the blaze.
The first fire department ever was in ancient Rome, and it was private. It was a brigade of about 300 slaves of this patrician Roman citizen that would go to the site of fires and negotiate the sale of the underlying land while the house was burning. And until you had given up your property, they wouldn't do anything. Once they had acquired it, they would put out the fire. And turns out that that's a excellent financial strategy.
It's insane. I think Mike Davis, before he passed away, had wrote an article, I want to say maybe Jacobin, about private fire departments, because there was a fire in Malibu, and his whole thing was like, there's certain areas where maybe people shouldn't just live. And when you live in these areas, these are the things that are going to happen. So rich people,
you're mocking nature.
Yeah, we're going to have a fire department on call. And while I was in LA, I did see some fire department trucks. It was like fire service, and it was like something's fire service. which I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. There's private fire services out here, but I get it. You know, the Palisades is a place that it's right next to Malibu, so there's definitely a lot of money there.
And the flip side, to offer a counterpoint, the flip side to private fire departments and staple of large and small communities during the 20th century, mid 20th century heyday of like Western societies was the volunteer fire department, right? The brigade, usually this would be an extension of military service, or in the sense that people would get drafted into the army, they would serve their time in the military, and during that time they would learn the discipline, the physical fitness, the skills, and the confidence, the comfort with danger to become firefighters. And then when they went back to their communities, right, like missing they could replicate the most positive parts of their experience through volunteer fire brigades, right? Like it's a little like being a reservist. You train, 1 weekend a month, and you're on call in case anything goes wrong. And other than that, you live in your community and you live your life. You collect resources. I don't know how that works exactly, but for Kurt Vonnegut, for instance, volunteer firefighters were the peak of communitarian, everyday heroism. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. But in many places, I don't think the social capital exists. I don't think the sense of solidarity and mutual aid, and also that the habits of discipline, the regularity of life exists to support that kind of model. But it's something that we should aspire to, right? Both recreate the conditions for it, and once that's possible, create those kinds of voluntary institutions that don't necessarily get attached to a paycheck, aren't necessarily part of a market transaction, to provide the most essential services. That is another way that you can get away from the cycle, like in California, of over-investing in firefighters during in the wake of a catastrophic blaze, and then finding that you're short of people and training when the catastrophe comes.
I haven't seen the news. Is LA still burning, or has it calmed down?
The latest I saw was that it was as bad as ever.
Really? Oh, it's horrible. It's sad. It reminds me of Paradise up north.
The thing is that this is not limited to LA, right? All of Western North America is vulnerable to this kind of catastrophic blaze as climate change increases drought conditions, increases and makes forests, especially, more and more like reservoirs of kindling and fuel during the summers. When we first moved to British Columbia, forest fires were a relatively remote and occasional phenomenon. Now, every year we have a burning season. And my family's home in the interior, in the last 20 years, there's been 2 or 3 times that we've been evacuated or close to an evacuation because of wildfires coming in and reaching the edges of the municipality. So last year or 2 years ago, a couple of smaller villages in the interior were just completely destroyed. Conditions are getting worse and worse on that front, and there is no adequate response to it. You can't geoengineer your way out of this, what ends up happening, right? Do you just accept that cyclically you're going to lose some proportion of your communities, or do you abandon areas for human habitation? And then where do those people go? How do they get compensated for their lost livelihoods, their disrupted lives, the homes which they no longer have?
My cousin sent me a picture. She actually, her and her husband weren't home. She's in England at the Cordon Bleu, and her husband was working in Seattle. So he did go when he found out the news and sent her some photos. So she sent me some photos, and it's leveled everything. She said, Jason, my house is flat. There's nothing there. You know, she's panicked and definitely emotional. It was crazy to see. So, what's like some people have been saying in the chat? How is the homeowners insurance companies going to find a way to deny in the wake of Luigi Mangione?
Exactly. They might want to be a little bit more careful about that. Although this might also be an opportunity for that private security that we talked about to step in. And actually, during the last period of hyper economic polarization and exploitation, it wasn't uncommon for financial institutions and big businesses that knew exactly what they were doing to team up with the Pinkertons or the actual mafia when they were busy foreclosing on homes, foreclosing on farms, other forms of profit taking that people recognize as being particularly exploitative. They realized that at those moments they were vulnerable to public anger and public violence.
Well, we have to leave on a good note. What positive can we say, Kuba?
So when I think about the future,
okay,
I see things like the development of renewable energy and the precipitous drop in the cost of per megawatt hour of things like solar coming out of mass production in China and scientific breakthroughs that are now happening more and more frequently in China and East Asia. I think that we have only begun to see the transformative power of modern, dynamic, and engaged China. And when you look at things like their development of high-speed rail and the creation of their high-speed rail network over the last 20 years, not only that, but the introduction of the AI and logistical systems to operate it, especially during peak periods like Chinese New Year. There's a great deal of potential for to take that energy and globalize it, to take that capacity and have it contribute more than just cheap exports, disposable products globally if we let them. And there's one of the most frustrating things from somebody who's, an academic and a child of, scientists, is that right now there's so much potential for massive breakthroughs in fields like quantum physics, material science, that if we gave those sectors the type of financial support that the military-industrial complex gets, or that gets showered on, Tinder for dogs, or a new kind of Viagra, it might be a solution. We might have technological fixes to some of the worst social and political problems that we face. So I would like, it would be great if we could focus more of our collective efforts on that. It's good that in some parts of the world, science and technology are being treated as seriously as potential solutions to some underlying problems. I think that regardless of what happens with Trump or Poilievre or in the broader West, the march of renewables, thanks to Chinese exports and also infrastructure projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, is going to be unstoppable, right? And we may end up with a bifurcated world where oil and gas is just a legacy energy source for Westerners who insist on these old-timey cars. So, right now, I think that, and putting aside the political issues of how the CCP runs China, the most optimism I have is for the technical promise coming out of East Asia as a potential source. And I see this, it's not just China. I still work with many Vietnamese students, and these are high school kids that are building robots. The amount of talent available, their hard work, and their focus on real problems that face communities in the more remote parts of Vietnam, or things like water quality in Hanoi. They might figure it out, and then we should let them help us.
There you go. That's about as good as it's going to get. His name is Deep State Kuba. Thank you so much. This show's been a long time in the works. I dig it. I would love to make it maybe a monthly, bi-monthly. I know your schedule is erratic.
We'll work it out. We'll work it out. I could see that.
It's just fun.
It's just fun. Well, as long as you've got the Xanax ready for hangover.
I think we both have an ability sometimes to have not the greatest outlooks on situations, as I've been in a bit of a, I don't want to say stupor, but I don't feel good. And it didn't matter who was coming into office. I didn't feel good. I've been not feeling good about this since everybody blew up over George Floyd, because I was like, this is not going to have a good after effect.
Yeah, this doesn't end well.
But it's not.
But eventually it ends, and then something else.
Sean Moon says, hide the razor blades. It's not that bad, but I want to say this. All my friends that are working in services of any kind, mental health and homeless services, you guys are the real MVPs, because I don't see it getting any better for y'all, if not even seeing some budget cuts in the very near future. And it's not like the job is getting any easier. So I do have to read this comment before we go. Leftist trading card merch, when? Help me consume the effect of the background image. We did joke about these when Quinn made them for our live show in New York, and I wanted to do something. So you're going to see some different videos and things, and it's going to take a while for I get used to this interface. I'm literally starting all over, and I lost all videos that we've been using for the last 5 years. So Gene was able to find a few, and I was going to make an outro video with the cards with us, because we actually have them for all of the TIR people, but we have them for the Burgess's show has them, and they're pretty cool. Sam Cedar and the Majority Report people were a guest there, so there's the Cedar ones. Conan Neutron has one, and there was this really cool backdrop that Jordan Dubin made. So if you see the video of the New York show, which I don't remember if there was video, there was I don't know. That was really cool. I would like to do something with the baseball cards. I don't know what we could do with them. We were joking about trying to put little stats on them on the back, but
yeah, black pills distributed.
Black pills submitted. Did we make one for Varn? I don't remember if Varn had one.
He certainly should get one.
If he doesn't have one, he should definitely have one. I'll have to look in the. Quinn gave me the Dropbox with all the cards, and there was like hella cards. I was like, oh damn, this person had a card. Fucking Jake has a card on Ben's show. Like, oh shit, everybody's got a card. So, Dusty says there was audio. Oh, there was audio, so you guys didn't get to see it. That's a damn shame. But again, I look forward to doing live stuff. I don't know when you're coming down again. I know you've been busy just jet setting, so doing live stuff would be fun.
Yes, it would.
Ben's been doing more live stuff. You know, he's doing a live thing with McManus next week.
Yeah, he plugged it on the Canadian crosstalk.
When you were on.
Yeah, 3 days ago. I had this show that I was pushing, and he had his live event with McManus.
Oh, dope! You were okay. Dope. Yeah. I might try to go up for that if I can. Right. But thank you, Kuba. Please tell Summer I said hello. Enjoy what looks like a very nice day-ish in Canada with no snow.
Too much sun. I've got to work on a lighting solution. I have the ring light. You can see it in my glasses, right? I'm trying my best here, but I realize
you gotta
that
kill all the light. Like, it's the reason why I have the switch on it is freezing in my room, because I have to kill all the light. That's what I learned when we were on the Real News, that you can't have any light coming in if you want a decent halfway.
Okay, I'll work on that.
Oh, Riley Cool says they met both Jason and Kuba at the Cutting Room in New York. Who was Riley? Do you remember who Riley is? Riley's a woman, right?
I see the screen name. The Cutting Room was in LA, right?
No, that was New York.
It's hard for me to match screen names with faces, especially since that avatar.
It's like, yeah, people come up to you and they're like, "Hey, I'm Ass Nugget 47. My name is Hank Micklesberg," and you're like, "It's a lot you just threw at me there, Nugget."
But I would like your story, like Nichols Nugget.
That's the best shit, when people's name doesn't match their screen name and they come up to you like, "Yeah, you know, I'm Good Cat 47. My name is Steven Herschenmeyer." Oh, hey, Hershey. Oh, okay. I think I remember some of these people. But thank you guys for watching this, supporting this. Thank you for all the super chats. Again, I will be back early tomorrow morning to talk with Conan Neutron and Daniel Bessner. We're going to have a fun in the weeds talk about this music. I won't even call it by the fake moniker, but the 90s. We're going to talk about the 90s. We'll just leave it like that. Be a 90s discussion. So let me figure out how to end. I don't even know how to end the show. That's how different this thing is. All right, I found it. Okay. Thank you guys. And Kuba and I are